Good morning. It's Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau. It's Friday. It's 10 o'clock. It's the magic hour for our weekly Talk to a Farmer Friday. And so our guest today will be George Frisvold with the University of Arizona. He's an economist with the Extension Office and one that really knows well how to crunch these numbers. And obviously we have some new farm numbers. They happen to be the Census of Agriculture numbers that were released this February, a month and a half ago, I think now. And these Census of Agriculture numbers by the USDA NAS come out every 5 years. So the ag census actually comes out more often than the regular census that occurs every 10 years. So this census is really valuable, not only to farmers, not only to economists like George Frisvold, but also to you and me. We learn a lot from these numbers. Hello, New York Farm Bureau. Thanks for joining. I love to see you guys. And Bobby, 47BD joined. Thank you. For those coming on live, again, it's Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau with our Talk to a Farmer. And we're doing a 2-month series. We're actually going into June with this series on the Census of Agriculture and, of course, those numbers that are specific to Arizona. So while it's Talk to a Farmer Friday, I'm actually going to be talking to an economist today who's really has the presence of mind to really give us some insights about these numbers and what they mean to Arizona, and specifically the Census of Agriculture numbers for our state. So hold on. I'm going to bring George in. Give me just a split second. So let's see if he comes on. We'll give it a few minutes. George was a guest of mine during the Future of Arizona Agriculture. There he is. I see his keyboard.
Let me see. What am I doing? Hi. How do I get?
Just look on the screen, and there should be this little arrows circle. It's a little circle, but there are arrows going in opposite directions. Tap that, and that should turn your phone camera around. We'll give it a few minutes. It's on my phone, it's just beneath me. On your phone, it should be in the same place. Opposing arrows in a circle. And it should be right on your screen.
I'm not seeing it. Let me see.
It's not wanting to be cooperative today. Well, you could always point your phone to a pretty picture in your eye.
Well, yeah, I don't know. So I'm getting, let me see. What?
There's this might help you too. And of all the little icons, there's a mic icon, and it looks just like a little icon microphone. Then there's a camera icon, and then there's this an upper arrow and a bottom arrow kind of in a circle following. It's almost like they're chasing each other. If you hit that, that will flip your camera around. And there's also a smiley face. At least those are the icons that are showing on my screen.
Getting something that looks like a little paper airplane, and it's live, and it has the number 2, and an X, and Farm Bureau.
So that's on the top of the screen. Look a little bit below.
Okay, on the bottom, it says add a comment, and there's a question mark, and it looks like a little paper airplane, and that's it.
Well,
and before I was able to swipe and get my picture looking in.
Yeah, and so you could see yourself.
Yeah.
Well,
can you see me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I'll just keep it right here then.
Yeah.
I won't know what I look like, but I know what I look like. So.
Yeah, no, I can see you now. So you're an economist. You're not an Instagram user.
No.
I've been really stretching your experiences when it comes to Instagram, right?
Yes.
But I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. So in my introduction, George, and again, for those that are joining us, we have someone from New York Farm Bureau, probably my colleague, Stephen from New York Farm Bureau, and Bobby has joined us. And for those others that come on live, we'll invite them to ask questions if they want. But as my guest, George Frisvold is one of our economists from the University of Arizona Extension, and has, over the years, course of time, you've actually done a major analysis of agriculture's contribution to the state of Arizona. And that's coming up again now that we have the results of the 2022 Census of Agriculture. And for those listening, I don't have that date wrong. They actually listed as the 2022 Census of Agriculture, even though we're in 2024. And the reason for that is in 2022 is when they captured the data. And then, of course, it takes them some time to collect that data and analyze it. Well, they just released it in February of this year, February of 2024. So when the 2017 census came out, George, you and your rockstar team, I like to call them the A-team, economist team, when that came out, you guys crunched the numbers, you brought in some other data, and that's how you were able to come to the current number that we have, which is at 23.3 billion. Well, obviously, it's now time to do that again. But this is a great segue to my first question to you. What should, now that we know the census is out, and it's before the economic analysis that you and your team will do, but is there any takeaways currently that our Arizona farmers and ranchers and dairymen should take away from the current census if they looked at it in our publication in Arizona Agriculture?
Sure. And what I tend to focus on is something where I look at a number and I pop it into Excel, and then I do a double take and I say, wait, that can't be right. And I double check and I triple check. And we'll get into like numbers of farms and acres later. But between 2017 and 2022, net farm income in Arizona, even adjusting for inflation, tripled.
Wow.
Yeah. And I kept going, wait, is that right? But then again, anytime you get data, you want to cross-check it with other things. Nationally, 2022 was a phenomenal farm year. The years 2021, 22, and 23 nationally were among the best years for farm income, going way back, decades. 2024 nationally, we're kind of going back toward the longer term average, if not lower. But one thing is there's lots of data points to say like 2022 was a really good year. In terms of net income, yeah, it went way up. Another thing is that the Census of Ag has information on farm assets. There's the saying that farmers are land rich but cash poor. And if you look at the value of on-farm assets, so this is the land, building, farm machinery, equipment, the value of those assets was $24 billion on farm.
Wow.
So farmers in Arizona manage a lot of the land and a lot and very valuable assets.
And what you're speaking to, George, and move your phone so it is facing you a little bit more. Thank you. When I look at and I know that's just a brief overview. I'm doing the same thing. I'm moving out of the camera. But I liked what it said here. Almost 83% of Arizona's agriculture commodity sales, and this is on sales, came from only 177 farms with sales of 5 million or more. Yeah. So it's the big, facts are facts, numbers are numbers. It's the big farms that are pulling in a lot of these farm product sales. And we say big, and people have this little flashing light that goes off behind their head. They're all family farms. They just might have scaled, they just might have increased in size so that they could, be profitable. And so that's where we're seeing some of this. So you're kind of actually predictively a little bit encouraged even before you do your analysis of what our contribution is to the economy here in Arizona?
Yeah, and getting to like this family farm structure, I was pulling together some numbers from the census, and this is about the only time you get those numbers. But 89% of farms in Arizona are either family run or they're partnerships. And there's another 4% that are they're corporations, but they're family held corporations with 10 or fewer shareholders. So, you know, these are not huge, these are basically family run for tax purposes and liability purposes. They're corporations, but they're really family run. And if you combine just straight up family operations, partnerships, and family held corporations with 10 or fewer shareholders, that's 93% of the farms in the state, and it's 85% of sales.
Sure.
So U.S. agriculture is still very much, a family-owned and operated venture.
Regardless of size, and that's what people have to recognize. So I think of the Hickmans, you'd have to classify their egg farm as a large farm. They've incorporated, so you could call it a corporate farm.
Well, sure, yeah,
but it's run by the kids.
Yeah, and again, I've joked that, in news stories, when the reporter is reporting about something they like, then it's a family farm. And if they're reporting about something they don't like, then it's a corporate farm. But these operations, even though, again, for tax and liabilities, they're corporations. Again, if you go to most like pediatricians' offices, they're corporations, because they're organized that way for tax and liability purposes, because pediatricians could have a lot of liability with lawsuits and whatnot, but nobody says, oh my goodness, I send my children to corporate pediatricians.
Yeah, they'll never say that.
Yeah.
I think in farming, we need to interview you more, George.
Mm-hmm.
I think in farming, we're not getting that message across enough, that they're family farms. They might be incorporated, but they're family farms. They might be big, but they're family farms. Yeah. I feel like I'm, horrible metaphor, but beating a dead horse, because I say it all the time. Our family, for tax purposes, liability purposes, did the same thing when we farmed. Mm-hmm. But we were family farm. So we've talked about what the farmers, the ranchers, dairy farmers, and the excitement we can have in seeing some of these numbers, and those numbers were captured in 2022. But what should consumers take away from these numbers? And some of them look at it and say, oh, woe is us. Our farm numbers are down. But I think there's more to look at if you peel this onion properly.
Right. Well, I think some things, again, a lot of consumers don't know anything about agriculture. And again, just pulling up the census of ag in a nerdy fashion, I guess, about 244 million, so about $250 million is now being sold through direct sales.
Wow.
So these are things like, you pick enterprises or farmers markets and things like that. And that's up about 5% from the last census. But the number of farms engaged in this has doubled.
Wow.
So it's small, but it's growing. But I think there's more of this idea, to connect with consumers directly to farmers. I think another thing, organic sales are up to $168 million. 1 in 11 farms produce renewable energy in Arizona. It's mostly solar. Yeah, it's mostly solar, but there's some wind and methane. But yeah, 1 in 11 operations are producing renewable energy, and I think that's something that urban consumers don't know about.
And that's in Arizona.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how are you going to? We kind of have a hint. You're an economist. You're already looking at these numbers and getting your mind around it. But how are you going to use these numbers? You guys do the economic report for us, and we're getting ready to do that again. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. How are you celebrating these numbers? I guess maybe that's
Again, it's kind of like diving into things, and there's, reporters, people have particular questions about things, and so you hunt up numbers to try to give them answers in context. But there's just a huge amount of things out there that make me curious, like for future research or policy issues. Again, farmers, it's saying that 30% of producers, and these are producers the USDA categorizes as anybody who's kind of involved in any of the farm level decisions. Like about a third of them basically have a full-time off farm job. So folks are very, very, very busy.
Right.
A heartening thing is that I think their USDA has a list of like what they call new and beginning farmers, so folks that have like less than 10 years of experience. And that's 23% of producers.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people, but then among the new and beginning folks, like 40% are 55 or older.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's almost like the older generation is like saying, I want to get back into it, or if they classify themselves as new, they were never in farming before. Maybe I know we have that in Arizona with our wine growers. We have a lot. If you look at their past resumes, we've got one amazing winemaker. Oh my gosh, his wine is wonderful. Sam Pillsbury. Well, he used to be a filmmaker in Australia. And so you would classify him as a new farmer. He migrated to the States. He's here in Arizona and he's making some amazing wine. We have a lot of that going on. There's another winemaker couple I know that they were consultants for cities. They were city planners. Must have done very, very well. Well, now they're in the wine business. And,
yeah. So
and they got into it when they were older.
Yeah, so this makes me curious. I mean, I think it's a good sign when you see a lot of people getting into the industry. It's not just everybody exiting. And this when you talk to people, someone will say like, I'm a third generation or I'm a fourth generation farmer. There's a lot of stuff in the press now about sustainability, but farmer, that's another thing I think consumers don't necessarily appreciate is that Arizona farmers care a lot about sustainability. They have this legacy in their families of farming and they want to keep doing it. But it does look like there's a continued inflow of new people getting into farming, which is good.
Yeah, it is. So this is neat, and we kind of know what these numbers have to excite you as an economist, obviously. So,
but
my next.
I was going to say, in terms of like what we use the numbers for. I mean, one of the things we find interesting is you can kind of see how different counties in Arizona stack up to the rest of the nation, and some things are obvious, like veggie production at Yuma is at the very tip top of national production, but even for you think of the big three counties in terms of ag production of like Yuma, Maricopa, and Pinal, but even the other counties, if you actually look at how they rank compared to other counties nationally, they're often really amazingly high. And you don't really think about that. And so ag is still very important all throughout the state.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say a thing about the census is that you actually get data down at the county level. There's like USDA reports numbers annually, but a lot of times they don't report that at the county level. And it's good to see what's going on at the county level. For example, if you look at like irrigated acreage in this census, it went up a fair bit in Cochise and Mojave counties. So that's kind of a metric of kind of looking at what's going on with water use there. You could see it starting to show up in the data. So there's a lot of county level things that you only get from the census of ag.
Right.
And when we use it, we don't just look at one source of data. We get data from USDA, we get data from the Department of Commerce, we get state, agency data from Arizona, we get data from the Department of Labor. And usually the data kind of paints a pretty much consistent picture, but sometimes not. And so then if you get the different government agencies having very different numbers, you have to dig deeper and kind of figure out why.
So,
go ahead.
By the time you're done, how many data sets have you investigated? 5 to 6, 7 to 8?
More than that. I mean, the thing is, there's like we rely on 3 federal agencies, but then each federal agency has its own different kinds of surveys that capture different things.
Okay.
And so, and there's different records from different places. So, you have 5, and actually it's more agencies because we get some stuff from USGS and other places. Yeah, so we get it from multiple agencies, and then multiple agencies have different surveys. And so, for example, USDA collects data on farm labor in a bunch of different ways, in a bunch of different surveys. And so that's very tricky to, if you get this question of, well, how many people are working in agriculture in the state of Arizona? And that's turns out to be a very tricky question.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, Maryland Farm Bureau joined us as well, and they have a neat comment. In Maryland, like Arizona, we lost acreage farmland, but gained number of farms. It's a testament to the strength of small and first-time farmers. I think you were speaking to some of those points. And because you brought up county, and Dave DeWalt, who launched this new series on the Census of Agriculture, which I've asked you to be a part of, and am interviewing you now to that point, you mentioned county data, and he did report in his report to us through our publication, Arizona Agriculture, Maricopa, Yuma, and Pinal counties remain in the top 40 of all United States counties in value of sales. And somebody will say, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, we have, I want to say, did he tell, and it's on the recording, it's either 2,000 plus counties across the United States. So 2,000 counties across the United States. It's a big number. And here we have 3 counties in Arizona alone that fall in that top 40 category. So that's right there for a desert state that doesn't have very much private land, that's producing and falling, and value of sales falling into 3 counties, Maricopa, Yuma, and Pinal counties.
Yeah, and I like to convert things in terms of percentages, because when you say, 40 out of 2,000 and something, it's like, what is that? And you go, it's like, the top 1% or the top half of the top 1%, oftentimes.
Wow.
And there's a lot of different kinds of production in Arizona that are just like if you talk about percentiles like they do in school, it's like the 99th percentile, just super high.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you're right. We need to play with those percentages when we can. So we mentioned this a bit during our last show when I was quizzing you about the future of Arizona ag. And, but explain to listeners why we need to be careful about not getting too overly foreboding about the farm number issues based on the Elon Musk analogy.
Right.
So we're looking at these numbers, and we're seeing loss of farms, and I reacted the same way. I'm like, oh no, we've lost farms, but you also have to approach it as an economist. So kind of explain what you were saying there.
Well, I was saying the problem is averages.
And I'm going to stop you for a second, George. Get a little closer to the phone or something, because your audio is.
Is that better now?
Yeah.
Okay, averages are really, really deceptive in farming, and your viewers may not get the Elon Musk analogy, but if we're hanging out and we're having like some kind of dinner party, and you go, what's everybody's average income? What's the average income of the people at the party? Then Elon Musk walks in, and you go, what's the average income? That's, well, now the average income is billions, but that doesn't describe the experience for most people. So in the Census of Agriculture, it said that Arizona lost a little over 2,000 farms in 5 years, which is like a 12% reduction, which, you go, whoa, wait, what? All these people are leaving farming. What's going on? But the census also breaks farms up by sales classes. And so of all the farms that left, 90% were operations that had less than $1,000 in sales.
90% of them.
Yeah. And so it's like, now having $1,000 in sales, those are hobby farms.
Yeah,
right?
that doesn't even pay for my mortgage,
Yeah.
and I don't have a high mortgage.
Well, that, as Ashley Dickel has said, he goes, well, that's almost somebody's 4-H project.
Well,
right.
And I will tell you that I did ask Dave DeWalt, and he said that because they had started counting the tribal lands, I want to say in 2007. And he said a lot of those subsistence farms where they're either just growing farm product for themselves or ceremonial corn, especially for ceremonial representation in their ceremonies, especially with the Navajo and Hopi. He said there's several of those farms that are no longer farming for any number of reasons, but that had an impact on that as well. And it's not to be diminished. I mean, anybody, even a 4-H project, but the threshold for being classified as a farm is pretty low. If I grow an indoor herb garden and go to a farmer's market and sell $1,000 worth of product, I can call myself a farmer.
Right. And the thing is, now there's different ways to look at it. If you're looking at it as like the state's ability to produce food, so those little teeny tiny operations, they were in 2017, they were 3% of 1% of sales.
Oh, wow.
And now they're just like 1% of 1% of sales.
Wow.
So they're engaged in agriculture. They're doing it. It's certain, right? If $1,000 is your gross sales, that obviously that's not where your income is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're doing it for other reasons. And people farm and ranch for things just besides the profit and the money. There's a lot of people who are engaged in ag activities, and they're counted as farms by USDA.
Sure.
And so there are farms that had less than 5,000 in sales, and they accounted for, like 0.2% of sales. So the average doesn't really tell you what's going on. Another thing is that if you look at, you could split things up in terms of who had gains in income and who had losses. So about 1 in 5 farms had gains, and that 1 in 5 farms that had gains, their average was between $400,000 and $500,000.
Right.
So that's a good income. But then 4 out of 5 had net losses.
Yeah.
And their net losses were about $20,000. So you have a lot of folks who are engaged in farming, but like making a lot of money off of it is not why they're doing it.
Right.
And then you have a relatively small number of folks who are really, really, really good at it. Like the best in the country, the best in the world at doing it. So you really have that mix of two groups. And so when you average them together, you kind of come up with something that doesn't really match anybody.
Yeah. And go back to that one number you said, 90%. Was it 90% of those farms that went out of business were approximately $1,000 in gross sales.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you
Of all
said.
the ones, of the decline in farms, it was that mostly 90% was that teeny tiny group.
Yeah, it's like you said, a 4-H project.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So now that's on number, and it goes back to I loved your analogy about Elon Musk. He's going to skew the average because he's a billionaire, and when my annual income is tossed in with his, it doesn't tell the true story.
Right. Yeah. So in Arizona, you've got like, 1 in 5 who are making like $450,000 a year.
Right.
And then you've got 4 out of 5 that are losing money. And so when you average that, you go, well, on average, people are making, 200,000. But that's not, there really aren't that many people in that average.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So, again, there was loss of farms, and now we realize that 90% of those had sales of no more than $1,000. What about the acres lost? Have you had a chance to do more analysis on because what did they say in if I can find it quick enough, but we obviously lost acres in Arizona. Have you been able to kind of assess that as well?
Yeah. And I mean, we've been losing acres since, 1980. Every census of ag,
Right.
the acres are going down. Now, acres have been going down and down and down steadily every 5 years with every census, but income has been going up and up and up. And so the key, people build houses, and a lot of us, as you noted, a lot of Arizona land isn't private land; it's public land. It's like Forest Service BLM land. So a lot of any kind of urban growth is going to come out of farmland.
Yeah.
And that's just been how but it's been happening for decades now. And the key is to have innovation and new technologies so that yields are continuing to grow. Now, also in the state, we have 170,000 acres that the USDA designates as idle, and that's land that's not being currently planted and harvested, but could be brought into production without significant improvements.
Okay.
170,000 acres is a lot of acres. Now, if ag prices like went through the roof, let's say there was like worldwide food shortages or whatnot, and farm prices started to go way up, a lot of that land would go back into production.
Probably. Yeah. And one farmer keeps, and you really reflected it on the numbers. Okay, acres are going down, but our sales and productivity is going up. So that means we figured out how to do more with less. In this case, it's less land. And if you compare even just cotton yields, let's just talk about that. It's one of our 5 C's, and we're not growing as much cotton as we used to, but per acre, if you compare it to 100 years ago, what we can produce in 1 acre, the productivity is shot way up.
Yeah.
Now so researchers like you kind of hint that the improvements or the innovation might be a little bit more incremental. It might not be as dramatic as it's been in the past. But the fact of the matter is technology keeps helping us. Even just simply seed technology keeps helping us improve our agriculture.
Yeah. Because production is just yield times acreage. So if yields go up by the same percentage, that acres are going down, then, you can keep constant. But what's actually happened historically is that yields have gone up faster than acres have come down. And but, to keep that going, you really need, to have like a land grant university. You have to have private industry and, land grant universities working together to develop that new technology so the yields do keep going up.
Right. Very good. So even your point about the lost acres, we still have to be encouraged. Loss is loss, but if we don't calibrate the entire picture with the right numbers, we'll again skew what's really going on.
Right. And Arizona has, again, we still have plenty of land that's available. The issue isn't land; it's water.
Yeah.
And Arizona, you can't talk about Arizona ag for very long without getting to water, because that's really the constraint.
You are so right on that. Well, here's my last question, and you kind of hinted to some of those points. You've been throwing out some interesting nuggets of information as you've, dug into the Census of Agriculture, the latest one. Is there any other interesting, maybe forecasting or assessments on these numbers so we've had looks like a couple dozen people that have popped into this conversation with us, and we'll have more that will view this later, George, which is kind of cool. So any other things or nuggets of information that you would close out with on behalf of listeners that will especially be listening to this later?
Well, what's you alluded to this and you discussed it right at the beginning. It's like, okay, it's 2024, but we're talking about 2022 numbers. So when you're looking at the Census of Ag, you're really kind of looking in the rearview mirror. And it's that's very useful for getting like what's happened over the past 5 years, to see what's going on. And it's good for looking at long-term trends, like we talked about, like the acreage changing over time. That's a longer-term trend. In terms of like kind of immediate forecasts, it's not really built for that. I mean, there's other things I look more at, annual USDA numbers. One thing I've been looking is at crop insurance data, because you can in Arizona or anywhere there's irrigated agriculture, you don't get crop insurance payments because of drought. If you have irrigated farms, it's like, well, you need water. So when you get insurance payments under the USDA crop insurance, it can be under what's called failure of irrigation supply. So you didn't have water, so you couldn't plant your crop because you can't really grow dryland crops in Arizona. And that data comes out every year. And one of the things I was noticing, if you look at central Arizona, the acreage covered under this failure of irrigation applied would hover at about between 10 and 20,000 acres in central Arizona. And that has a lot to do with the vagaries of the San Carlos Reservoir, where water is available from that. But then in 2023, people were getting crop insurance payments because they couldn't plant their crops because they didn't have water, went from about 15,000 to about 40,000 acres in 2023. And now it's up to 60,000 acres. So we're starting to see the cutbacks in Colorado River water, having a bite.
Yeah.
The census from 2022 starts to pick up on stuff. So the crop insurance data is a better indicator of what's going on with land fallowing in the state. Again, the census numbers, we'll be burrowing down and looking at particular industries in the state, not just agriculture writ large. Arizona Department of Water Resources is doing a lot of basin projections, different basins in the state. They did about 6 or 7 this past year, but they're scheduled to do a lot more, and so that's going to be an important thing to keep our eyes on when those numbers come out.
Interesting. Yeah, George, I am so excited about the fact that the University of Arizona and your economic team will be putting together, because predictively we'll be able to announce the new numbers, and it won't we're saying November because you've promised we can launch it at our annual meeting and report it and release it to the media and everybody. The thing that will be exciting is to have a new number, because this 23.3 billion we've had for about 5 years, and it's time for us. I like what you say, it's kind of long in the tooth right now.
Yeah. Well, and again, what we try to come up with a more comprehensive picture, so it isn't like the Census of Agriculture only tells you what's going on farm.
Right.
And so then we look at what are called backward linkages. So what are all the input suppliers to farmers in the state? What do they contribute? And so those are backward linkages. And then there's all these things with like logistics, like refrigeration, hauling, movement, things actually getting it to market.
Right.
So we look at, again, that's post-farm gate. We look at that. And then there's a food processing sector, right? That, people aren't, consuming the raw products for the most part. It's getting processed. So we look at that industry. And so we capture kind of the whole supply chain of ag production. And then all the income that's generated from that, people have money in their pocket and they're buying things in other industries that aren't farm related. Right? Farmers buy trucks, farmers buy, electronics. Farmers pay for all these other things. Well, you wouldn't have that spending in the state if you didn't have farm income. And that's those multiplier effects of how much extra income from the whole farming sector contributes to the entire economy.
Right. And that's why farming is so important in the rural areas, because most of the farming has to be out and about because they have big swaths of land and they're out in the rural counties. And if we don't have farming, we hurt our rural communities. So, I mean, there's so many aspects to this that are so important. I like to call it the food supply chain that you're doing an economic assessment on, George. And I can't thank you enough for you and your team for what you do for us and for agriculture and helping us tell that better story and the true story. And I know it's a big lift for your team, but thank you for the lift.
Yeah,
and
it's sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure because I'm always amazed. I told you before. I'll look at these numbers and go, wait, it can't really be that big or that high, can it? And I double check and I triple check and they're like, yeah, sure enough, yeah, Arizona is just very unique and a very productive state to be doing farming in.
That's awesome, and I'm glad that you're part of it. So listen, let's stay in touch.
Okay.
You never know when I'll ask you to do another one of the, well, actually, when we need to do another Talk to a Farmer, Talk to an Economist, George Frisvold from the University of Arizona, we'll need to do it in November because even though you'll do the release and make the big announcement, I need to do a follow-up conversation with you. I just love to talk to you. You excite me. I didn't pursue numbers. I pursued journalism, but I've learned, thanks to you, to appreciate numbers much more. And for those that have joined us live, thank you. And it was fun for Maryland Farm Bureau to throw their comment out. And then the other point I want to say is that stick with us. We do this every Friday. And people like George Frisvold are shedding light in places that as it relates to farming that we didn't realize we needed to be looking at. So thank you.
Okay, sure enough. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, and you as well, George. And tell everybody hi for me.
I will do. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.